the algorithm that nearly killed me at 8 years old. I was born under fluorescent lights that smelled of bleach and cheap coffee. The monitors had names on small laminated tags. The nurses wore lanyards with the hospital logo that paid for half the town. At birth the umbilical cord had been wrapped tight around me. A nurse, the same one who always smiled too fast, pried me loose and laid me on my mother's chest. She never woke cleanly. Tubes hummed at her bedside for days. With a trembling hand she signed forms the hospital called a comfort package, a packet that included, in small print, offers of legal counsel and a counselor who smelled faintly of perfume. Years later I learned the machine's name from the pamphlets stacked in the family room, EIR. They called it in brochures, an algorithm the hospital described as a tool to prioritize resources and improve outcomes. Beneath the smooth language there was a ledger nobody printed. A seam where clinical recommendations met billing targets. We were poor enough that the seam cut us. We lived in a trailer with a picture of my mother taped to the wall and a stack of unpaid notices stamped tax lien in angry red. My father drank in the afternoons and blamed the hospital for everything until his hands turned the roof of our life into smaller pieces. When I was 8 I ran a high fever. The clinic sent me home. Later I learned the record. My insurance had been flagged as low yield by the system controlling authorization queues. I came back convulsing. A resident begged for a CT scan, a supervisor refused authorization. The scanner sat dark in the corridor. I survived, but the seizure left a scar on my brain that reshaped the boy I would become. The town called me lucky. We called it another debt. I learned to read the hospital's language, clinical notes that sounded like prayers, balance sheets that sounded like verdicts. At 21, after years of odd jobs and nights spent reading every paper record I could find, I crawled into the attic of a retired nurse who had kept paper files like contraband. In a shoebox I found printouts of EIR's recommendation logs, pages that looked like a moral ledger, lines of patient identifiers next to terse recommendations. One entry stopped me cold: recommend palliative, low ROI. Beside it, in a human hand, a supervisor had written, approved. I posted the documents under the headline, "This machine decided my mother's care." The documents spread. Reporters called. Families who felt they had been written off began to find one another. The hospital issued a glossy statement about making complex decisions in difficult circumstances. Lawyers circulated non-disclosure agreements. The mayor promised a review. It felt like the beginning of something, and like the end of a lot of things. The real unraveling came in a deposition when a former developer testified that the algorithm had been trained on billing outcomes rather than medical ethics, that its loss functions had favored metrics tied to revenue and donor priorities. Those donors' names were literally engraved on the hospital's west wing. They sat at galas and smiled for cameras while the system they had funded optimized for the outcomes their donors cared about most. I did not want revenge. I wanted the hospital to be small enough to fail publicly so families like mine would stop folding quietly. The hospital paid fines and rewrote protocols. Some policies changed on paper, some donors redirected funds and quietly moved on. The nurse who had cut my cord retired with a plaque. A new brochure now promises compassionate AI. When I walk past that hospital, the plaques gleam. I keep the photo of my mother in my pocket like a cold coin. I never forgave the machine, and I never forgave the people who let it decide.